Named president of Divorce Right, and we provide training for HR professionals and company supervisors, but we also provide divorce coaching and case management, providing guidance and direction that your divorcing employees so desperately need. Divorce is a huge disruptor, not only to the employee going through it, but to the company they work for. Our coaches have a very unique perspective on divorce that sets us apart. They have a deeper understanding of the legal, financial, and emotional aspects of divorce, and they can handle even the highest conflict cases with compassion and professionalism. Our coaches are trained to look at the entire picture, helping your employees make good decisions based on their goals and their expectations. So, if you're an HR benefits manager, or an HR benefits provider, or consultant, please reach out to us and see if adding our suite of solutions is a good fit for your business. And as a reminder, we have SHRM credits for SHRM members, and we'll be posting that link at the end of this broadcast so that you can be sure to grab those. And I want to introduce you to Paulette Rigo. She is not only my friend, she's my colleague. She is an incredible certified divorce coach and mediator and is one of the best in the business. And she's the director of coaching and case management here at Divorce Right. And today we're going to be talking about something that is so cool. I love this topic because I go down a lot of rabbit holes trying to find academic studies around the divorce process, and there are not many. But today we're going to be talking about the cost to a company when a CEO divorces with our special guest, Jordan Nayland, who is an assistant professor of law at the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University. Professor Nayland's research interests span law, finance, economics, and accounting. He primarily examines corporate governance, fiduciary laws, and duties, corporate acquisitions, and agency problems in financial markets. His work is published in the Journal of Accounting and Economics, the Journal of Corporate Finance, Berkeley Business Law School, and the Journal of Banking and Finance. And he has presented at several leading conferences in law, finance, and accounting, both in the United States and internationally. His work is frequently cited in popular news outlets, including the Wall Street Journal and MarketWatch.com. Professional Nayland's teaching experience includes courses on financial institutions, bankruptcy, corporate finance, and mergers and acquisitions. He received a BA in economics from the University of Texas, a JD from the University of Houston, and a PhD in finance from the University of Arizona. He has previously worked as a senior lecturer in finance at the Faculty of Business and Economics at the University of Melbourne in Australia, and as a visiting economist in the Office of Litigation Economics at the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. So now I know that you know why he's here today. Thank you so much for being here, Professor Nayland. It's so nice to have you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for having me, and thanks to everybody that's participating and joining and watching us. I really appreciate the chance to get here and tell you a little bit about my work.
What I'd love to do before we get started is I'm going to post a link to the paper that we're going to be talking about today, so that everybody can get a copy of that, so that you can grab it. So now all of a sudden I need to find the chat. Here we go. And just so that if you would like to go grab grab that link right now so that you can start to understand. So Paulette, I will send it over to you to get us started.
Make sure you get that because it's important to read this study. So I'm so excited you're here, Jordan. Thank you. I'm not sure if I should call you Professor or Jordan, but we'll start on a first name basis.
Very informal.
Yeah. Exactly right, but didn't want to be disrespectful. You've worked a lot to earn that. So as you can tell, research is our jam. I mean, Vicki is not joking. Like, she does her research deep and wide, and I'm a little bit of a nerd geek in that world too. So when she told me about the research that you did, it was a no-brainer to have this in-depth discussion. So let's just start with the research. So what is the topic, if you want to just throw it out there, and why did you choose this area? I mean, did you wake up one day and go, aha, I've got an idea?
Yeah. So this was actually, I started this as part of my doctoral dissertation. And at the time, there was a lot of research coming out saying that CEOs are important, and their personal lives can be important as well. But the research that I saw focused more just thinking about like, what happens if the CEO is not around, like he goes on vacation or he gets sick and has to go to the hospital, something like this, where you might expect if you can't work or you can't do your job, and that's going to have some negative effects on the firm. But then nobody was really looking so much at like the personal lives of the CEO, and just kind of intuitively to me makes sense that if something's going on in the personal life of the CEO, then given every little decision that an upper manager could make could affect the whole firm, there's probably some implications as far as like what's happening in his personal life affecting the firm, and then there being some implications in terms of what's going on with things like the shares, if they're a publicly traded company, or the profit of the company, anything you might imagine that's going to be influenced by the decisions that the managers are making. So that's kind of what got me started on this, just to think there was like this big gap in our understanding of what's important, what people should be looking at. And so I just really wanted to see if there was anything there. And then having the background in law, because I had just come out of law school when I started my PhD, I was thinking, the legal issues around divorce seem very large. I know I'd spoken with Vicki a little bit earlier about some of the issues that come up with lawyers or legal proceedings, and these things can be, they can boil over really fast, right? And so that's kind of what got me generally interested in the topic.
I'm not sure. Thank you for that. So. I'm not sure if anybody's hearing some static or tapping or something. Just check your connection.
There you go.
Yeah,
that
I need to
must be
hold the
what it is.
microphone a little closer.
Definitely your microphone. So be careful not to tap it. Yeah, it's amazing how sensitive those dark things are, right? Yeah. So you're right, because a lot of people don't think about the personal life, right, of CEOs and how that affects businesses. So if you own a business and you have employees, you might think how your employees might affect the business, maybe not as much as you should, but how do we then flip it and find that how does the personal life of a CEO or business owner affect the business? So tell us a little bit about a summary of the hypotheses that you were able to cultivate from that study.
Yeah. So this is based off of some theory from finance. So I'm sure you're probably all aware with this idea of like diversification. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and everything. And if you think about
sounds like the stock market.
Yeah, exactly. If you think about like a CEO, all of their money is really tied up in the company because they're given millions and millions of dollars of stock options, restricted stock grants, and all these things. And so they're not really well diversified. And when you think about a divorce, sometimes the ex-spouse will get some of the stock and options awarded in the divorce, but what, at least anecdotally, I see more, having done some research on what's going on with the CEOs, is their spouses will get either like a lot of cash essentially, or maybe some real estate. And then this makes the CEO even more undiversified, right? So then they're basically, all they're left with is stock and option grants. I don't know if you followed the Bezos divorce, but essentially he lost half of his wealth, but that was all tied up in Amazon. But he still really wanted to hold on to the voting rights of his ex-spouse's shares, because it's really important for incentives and for control of the company to have the CEO keep those shares and options. So generally, you see, like I was saying, the cash and the real estate go, and then that leaves the CEO really undiversified. And this means essentially like they've got a lot of risk now that they don't really like having.
Indeed.
Most people don't like a lot of risk, even CEOs. You think of CEOs all day driving motorcycles on the weekends or whatever, but it's still like not, people generally don't like risk.
They tend to be more conservative when it comes to the business.
Yeah, exactly. Especially after a divorce. Now they don't want the price of their stock to tank, right? It's kind of one way to think about it. So they may try to play it safe. And so then well, how do you play it safe? Well, you make safe investments at the company, or at least change things around so that your company is not quite so risky in one way or another. And so that's kind of the primary hypothesis. After the divorce, they lose some money, and this will make them a little bit more risk averse, and then that's going to feed through to the company because all of their money is tied up in the company, so they can't really reduce their risk anywhere else. It's illegal for them to do something like short their own stock.
And you don't have to give numbers or exact numbers, but how did you go about cultivating the companies, the numbers, or were you picking up the phone? Like, this seems like an awfully complex study to do. How did you go about
Yeah, I spent about a year going through public records and Google searches and just about anything I could get my hands on to learn about like who's getting divorced, because
It's
people aren't.
it's just, like, I don't know. There's not like a database or that I know of. Maybe there is.
No, actually, the one exception is Texas. Texas has this really nice disclosure of basically everyone that gets divorced in the state. But other than that, like if your CEO is not in Texas, and I had to do some real digging, like almost like being a private investigator, and people don't want to come forward with all this information a lot. It's kind of a sensitive issue.
Really personal, sure.
Yeah, exactly. So that was a challenge, but I eventually, I looked at the S&P 1500 companies, which are kind of the biggest, most publicly traded, biggest on the stock exchange companies, more or less. And then I just went through each of those companies, looked for about the past 10 or so years, and said, did the CEO get divorced there? So I got a sample of about 80 or so CEOs that actually got divorced while they were working. More obviously get divorced, but they weren't divorced necessarily while they were CEO. It might have been before or after or something like this. So I really hone in on these 80 CEOs and say, well, what's going on here? And so that after that data collection, I got the hypotheses, and I was trying to think more about like where do I actually look? What should I see changing if they're more risk averse? So one of the first things I look at is just what is the stock market risk look like for these companies, essentially the volatility. And you can see it like right as they're getting divorced, the stock volatility kind of flattens out of it for about a year or two around the divorce. This is like actually pretty significant. So, I mean, if you think of volatility as just as how much the stock goes up and down at any given point in time, it's like going from, if you were to think about how big that drop is, it's like going from the median, like the middle, to about the 30th percentile. So that's a pretty big drop down in terms of the amount of stock risk that we see. And then you see similar things with like the cash flows themselves. They're also kind of smoothing out a bit. They're not quite so up and down around this period when the CEOs are getting divorced. And so it seems that they're actually taking some actions to make things a little bit less risky, a little bit smoother there. And so this is interesting because when you think about, so like individuals may not like risk so much, right? We're always trying to think about like reducing risk, if anything. But actually shareholders kind of like risk because, it's like, you always hear this old adage, right? More risk, more return, right? And so you don't necessarily want your CEO taking less risk. And so this is a bit concerning if you're thinking that, well, maybe the CEO is doing what's more in their interest in terms of what they want instead of doing what the shareholders might want in terms of taking those high risk, high return types of investments or making decisions that are the amount of risk that you might want. So yeah, that was kind of the main result that came out of this. And then I look a little bit more and see, well, what are they actually, one of the specific things that they're trying to change. Mm-hmm. And they seem to be smoothing out a lot of the expenses. So you can see, like, in particular, there's this one piece on the balance sheet called selling, general, and administrative expense, and that seems to be one thing that's really kind of getting flattened out in terms of the volatility. It's a little bit smoother. So that seems to be one way they're potentially reducing the company's risk, is through kind of having smoothing out expenses over time instead of maybe taking a lot at once and then less later or something like this.
And I'm curious, of these 80 corporate CEOs, were you able to find out, or through your investigating, how many of those cases litigated, went to trial, how many of them mediated, like what method of divorce they may use, how contentious it was, and the contentious nature of it? Did that have any result or findings as to how much risk they were willing to take, or how conservative they were with their playing their business? Not sure if that question made sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, you can imagine all sorts of scandals are tied up with these divorces, right? Like,
shocking,
yeah.
I tell you.
So, I mean, you hear stories of, the CEO was, was doing something with somebody that he worked with, and like
corporate drama, sure.
Yeah.
Just talking, I mean, of course, the divorce drama sometimes comes with celebrities or politicians, but in the business world, it can also be perceived that way too. I mean, earlier you mentioned, the Jeff Bezos case, and McKinsey, and we could talk about Bill Gates, and I don't know how many other corporate executives have gotten divorced. Yeah. Pretty much, probably all of them. I'm sorry if I'm being, but let's just say, right?
Yeah.
I don't know the number, but Jordan, it has to, in your world, you tell us how many corporate executives end up getting divorced at some point and remarried and divorced again.
Yeah.
The more times you marry, the more times you get divorced, for sure.
Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say because I couldn't get details on everything. Obviously, it really depends on if the media is picking up all these things. But then, of course, like you said, there's all these kind of serial divorcers, if you will, like people just engaged just within like a couple weeks, and he seems to be wanting to go for like I think 4th or 5th marriage now. And
well, and that's very true. That and the demographic for divorces, for those of you out there, and why this made so much sense for me. The majority of divorces happen between the ages of 35 and 54. And those are your E and C-suite executives, right? Those are your highly compensated employees, those ones that are really, riding the rocket up the ladder. And the statistics show that first marriages, about 47% end in divorce. But when you start going second marriages, 63%. Third marriages, 74% of third marriages end in divorce. So again, these are the people that we're talking about here, right? And in your paper.
Yeah, definitely. And there's also this notion of I think it's called gray divorce, where there's been like an uptick in kind of more senior aged individuals getting more divorces than historically has been the case.
And the longer you've been married, the more chances are that you have higher assets, and things are complicated, and paperwork is involved, and it becomes really just complicated in general.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so this actually kind of feeds back into the back end of what I looked at in my paper. Is like we've got all these issues coming up, not just with the money, but that's the one thing I could see is what's going on with the money, or at least they're what typically happens in divorce in that case. Don't get all the scandalous details, but then of course if this is having a big impact on the CEO's decisions, like the board of directors needs to take this into account and do something to adjust for that. And so one of the things that I see then is that they go out and they change the compensation structure a lot. And what I mean by change is essentially paying a lot more around this time period. And so like if the evidence suggests here that the CEO wants to take less risk. So one of the old recipes for getting a CEO to take more risk is to give them more stock options, because then when the stock price goes up, then he'll get more reward, and so he'll maybe make the riskier decisions and get this kind of risk reward payoff back in alignment with what the shareholders want. So you see the board actually coming in, the CEO is getting not just more stock options, but also stock grants and more salary, more bonus. And so this is all like adding up to a couple, again, I'm looking at bigger companies, so not every company would be like this, but
right.
It's about a couple $1 million in additional compensation. And that's just for the CEO, right? That's not.
Is that annually?
Yeah. So I can't look out at a super long period because most CEOs, like they only stick around for, last I checked, it was around 6.5 years on average. So I don't know how far forward this will feed necessarily in all cases, but yeah, it's over the few years after divorce, it's up, anywhere from $1 to $4 million, depending on how many stock options and grants and things the board gives out, how big the company is, these sorts of things.
Yeah. And Paulette, I will remind you of the conversation we had with someone from a large electronics firm who had been working with the CEO of one of their divisions. It was a multi-billion-dollar division who didn't do this process, but felt so unprepared for his divorce that he actually quit the company and said, I can't lead this company right now. And he left. So it's interesting that, maybe had he stayed, that financially, but that he could have come out better. It's interesting that the CEOs actually end up coming out better in this process, which is kind of overwhelming for me anyway. I was not expecting these kinds of numbers, the millions of dollars of numbers that are made up for a C-suite executive going through divorce. It's amazing to me. So let me ask you this, Jordan, what would you like companies and anybody that's going to be reading this paper, what do you want them to take away from it?
Yeah, I mean, like big picture wise, of course, it's my view that the personal lives of the CEOs matter. It's not just something for headlines every once in a while. Like it really affects the company, it affects the shareholders. It's gonna overflow into probably every aspect of the company at some level. And so this is, at a minimum, just want to raise awareness about this, let people know like this is important. There's no, when your decisions are this important, and you have this, you're in this upper management type position, right? Every little thing matters. There's no real separation between your work life and your personal life, right? I mean, everybody has to balance this stuff, and CEOs, I'm sure, more than anybody.
They're no different.
Exactly.
It's a great soundbite. It sounds great. Work-life balance and keep it separate and different buckets. But it's kind of hard to do that, is what you're saying, Jordan, right?
Oh yeah, and every day I'm trying to figure it out, right?
We all are, isn't that the truth?
Yeah.
So what other related questions or research would you like to see kind of addressed in the future around this topic?
Yeah, well, I mean, one ties to what you were just talking about, is what's going on with the turnover people, because I couldn't really pin down with the data I had exactly what might happen, but I mean, you see, some executives, the personal life stuff gets overwhelming. Some of them, the scandals that are tied to the divorce are related to, not just things like affairs, but drug use and things can spiral quickly. Yeah. And so, like, it's not just about the risk, even though that's obviously the focus of my study. I'd like to see more about like what's going on. People have to get fired, or they just quit more. It's hard to know and put a solid number on that just from the sample size that I have. But that's another big one, because if you lose, for especially top management, it can take years to find the candidate you want. And if they're just gone all of a sudden, you can't just replace them willy-nilly, right? You have to go do a big search, and meanwhile, like, the company's just kind of put on hold in a sense if they don't have a leadership for a while. So that, I think that's the big one to think about, is what's going on with their chances of turnover, and then just more. I'd also like to learn more about, like, what's going on in, like, private companies, because I can't see. I have to look at all the information from public companies, but especially private companies, they're more likely to have like founding families or a founder in charge, and then, like, it's not just about CEO maybe getting distracted or whatever. Like, it's children are fighting over who gets what, who's going to control what. I know this also came up thinking about the Murdoch case again. Children from one marriage were arguing about whether or not children and a wife from a later marriage were going to get control of the companies and everything. And so that's another area I think is just really ripe for some cool research.
Right. And if I can just interject, Paulette, how many times have you worked with small to medium-sized business owners where both the husband and the wife were key executives? They were running the company themselves together, and then they find themselves in this process. Some can still work. I've worked on cases where they keep the business relationship going because without them, and they started this, company 15, 20 years ago, whatever, and they've agreed that they could work together, but that doesn't happen all that often. Paulette, I have a couple of thoughts that, companies that are going through my head in that small and medium-sized space. Did you have a similar experience?
I find that if it's a small company, like under 10 employees, it tends to get sold or broken up or dissipates and kind of collapses on some level. But if it's got, maybe 100 to 500 employees, I know that's not, peanuts to many people, but it's small business. So those ones tend to stick around a little more with restructuring and maybe bringing in another partner. It depends on how amicable they are. And is it just a husband and wife, or is it a family entity where now you have aunts, uncles, and generation after generation after generation of family members? And there's almost like this rite of passage, or their identification is wrapped up in the family business, right? I see your head, nodding, Jordan, right?
Yeah.
The CEOs are, like you said, they only stick around 6 or 7 years. They kind of swap out a little faster. But in those businesses, they stick around for generations. It's almost like a tattoo on their arm, like, I gotta stay. So yeah, divorce and family businesses might be your next homework assignment. I don't know, but small business, like you said, that more private business than versus publicly traded, or versus privately held. So I see, conflict is conflict, and it's not easy to keep a business running smoothly like a well-oiled machine when there's a disruption in the business because of a divorce.
Absolutely. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for being with us today. This was such an interesting topic. I knew that this was an issue, a matter. And when I read your paper, I was shocked to find out just exactly how expensive it is on the company. And what I'd like to remind everybody is that if you do have a C-suite executive, an E-suite executive, or anybody in your company for that matter, that is going through a divorce, we would love to support them and help them so that they can make better decisions, not lose their life savings because they're going through a relationship breakup. We've got their back and we've got your back. So reach out to us. We would love to chat with you and talk to you about how you can support your employees that are going through this in a kinder and gentler way so that they have a better result and can come back to work as a focused and productive employee. So thank you so much, Jordan. I appreciate you so much. I look forward to seeing everything else that you ever write in the future. I am a fangirl from now on. So thank you so much for being with us. And everybody else, we will see you next week on our LinkedIn Live, and we appreciate you being with us today. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Thank you again. I'll talk to you later.